I don't know who is coming and who is not coming. Obviously, we just threw this out there to the world, and we might have some people join in a few minutes or half an hour. I don't know, but this is going to be recorded for YouTube anyway. So why don't we start with your studio tour? Are you willing to give us a little bit of a studio tour?
Yeah, I set you up on the iPad just to kind of be able to take you for a walk.
Okay. And so this is a room in your basement, right?
Yeah, so let me
Or
just
somewhere in your house.
Yeah, so this is what was a secondary suite in the basement of our house. So I've got the full little kitchen in here.
Oh, cool.
Just kind of moved in about a month and a half ago, so I still haven't really set up. Kind of work changing out the lights in the near future, but yeah, this is it.
So you've got 3 working easels at the moment and then wall space.
Yeah, so when I do really large paintings, they go on this wall. So those easels kind of sit up against the wall, and then the trays go down to the floor with about 8 feet of height. And so a big painting can go on there, depending on what I'm working toward. Usually have multiple things on the go. Studio's feeling pretty empty. I had a big solo show in April here in Calgary and Toronto.
Oh,
so the studio's kind of in a state where, yeah, I haven't committed to another solo show, and I'm just kind of working out different ideas. I've got pieces heading out to Vancouver. I've got pieces still life that I'm getting back into. Working on these new shape supports. So I'm just building and stretching some new ones. And then I've always got a bigger one on the go that I'm kind of picking away at.
We have Deb Nicholson that just joined. I'm just going to say hi. Hi, Deb. How are you?
Hi.
We're just getting the grand tour right now.
Yeah, I was saying it's feeling a little empty. I've got a few little birds on the go, stick pieces, and then kind of.
Does it ever get like, how often do you clean your studio or reorganize your studio?
It really kind of, I'm going to put you back up on the easel here. It really depends on what's going on. Studio visits, something like this. I tidy all the time just to keep it somewhat organized, but an actual clean, not very often, unless I've got a guest coming. This is a nice space. This space has a separate entrance, the full kitchen. I've got a side bedroom that I won't even show you because I just dumped. I've got old paintings in there and the miter saws. I was just building canvases the other day. I still haven't cleaned that up. So I've got a side bedroom, which is going to be storage, kind of pulling out some of these bigger paintings once they're done and let them dry in there.
Yeah. Do you ever do the studio tours?
Like the actual ones that, no, I haven't.
Okay. Would you, now that you've got your own separate entrance and stuff like that?
Yeah, I used to have a little apartment in downtown Calgary, kind of just outside of the downtown, and I had a lot more people coming in and out. And then when I started having a home studio, well, I guess that was still home, but it was just me.
Yeah.
Early days. And then having a home studio, I haven't had it open to the public, but now having a kind of a separate, still in the home, but still completely separate, does change things a lot for me.
Yeah, good. I'm sorry, where's my manners? Can we introduce ourselves here? I'm Crystal. I'm going to be navigating Nick's group starting next week. That's more like a TA for those that are going to be watching this video later. Nick, can you introduce yourself, please? Tell us what you're all about, what your practice is about.
My name is Nick Rooney, and I pretty much just label myself a painter. I think artist is a wonderful term. I'm very much, it's hard. I used to think of myself as a very kind of old school traditional painter. I studied some classical realism. I did my BFA here in Calgary. I did my master's in painting in the UK, in London. I pretty much spent the last 12 years painting and drawing. And so I do think of myself as a traditional painter, but now I'm really interested in the merge between abstraction and realism. And I've really shifted my practice to include a lot of geometry and shapes and minimalism. And so that kind of takes out the traditional that used to be so important. So now I do a range of different still life and animal pieces, all involving some sort of geometric minimalism aspect.
Do you find that? Sorry, Deb, go for it.
I was just wondering if you had trouble finding your niche, like in that I mean finding where your work will sell best.
That's a great question. Yes and no. I think it's almost like style. And I talk a lot about style. Your niche, your style, your work is uniquely yours. And if you make it long enough, and if you make it at a high enough level, the market will find you. You will find your like-minded people. It's about finding your network. And I don't know how many students actually think about that in terms of your niche, it's not what gallery is going to fit you, it's what network. Because the network is going to lead you to the galleries. The network is going to lead you to the collectors. And if your work, I always had a saying that was told to me once, if your work impresses the artist, it's going to impress the gallery, which will then impress the collector. And so it's, not finding your niche, it's finding your people.
Right.
And being able to, kind of, I always thought of it when I was younger. I found painters that I really admired, and I had to make work that they admired.
Right.
That to me was making it. And once you're able to do that a little bit, then you start to build a reputation, and it's not really niche anymore. It's very, you're in full control.
Yeah, because you've got the abstraction in there, so you've got a little bit different. I'm still mostly realism, starting to lean towards the more expressionist kind of feel to it. At least I'm trying. The precise stuff still keeps calling me back. But finding that network of people that want the realism these days. Everybody seems to want the abstraction and very, very loose paintings and so on. And I like the loose stuff too, but it's just not fully in me to go that loose, you know?
And I don't think it has to be. It's interesting, the world of realism, because there's, for example, like figurative art is so popular now. It's made a complete resurgence from the 80s when it was like dead. There's a whole new appreciation for skill.
There is, I've noticed that, yeah.
And that it's missing in the academic world. It's missing in those universities, and it's taught through the ateliers. And skill gets a lot of Instagram press, social media. It's a horrible time to be an abstract painter on social media because everybody's an abstract painter. Everybody can pour paint or throw paint at a canvas, call themselves an abstract expressionist, stick up. And then it's, if you're good at marketing, you can build yourself a career. But if you've got realistic skill, not many people have that, and you can really build on that, and that people pay for that. That's why oil paintings historically have sold so well. Skill.
All right.
So I wouldn't be too concerned about, in my opinion, to be finding any type of commercial like way of painting, but finding what really feels good to you. Make 100 paintings, and then you're going to really hone in on you, and then you kind of talk about branding and all that, but then you put together a package of you rather than a style.
Right.
So, do you notice an increase of network when you went from your classical to your more abstraction, your more contemporary work? Did you start to see this difference between people recognizing your work and following you more and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because in truth, I'm somewhat realistic. I can paint mildly well, depending on who you compare it to. But if you look at the atelier, the really classically trained painters, they're so, now I have worked pretty hard to get my painting to, no, I wouldn't say on par, but to a level where I can reference that and be in that world. But that world is so small and it's so kind of particular, and it's a lineage, and if you're not from it, it's really hard to break into it. And then once you start incorporating other styles, so I started working with like geometric minimalism in my work as part of my master's thesis. So when I was writing about it, I started making it, but that incorporated the shapes, that incorporated colors, my palette changed. And yeah, it became much more kind of interesting to the contemporary world of painting, not only because of how I spoke about it, because of the masters, but how I kind of presented it as well. And that totally changed everything for me
Right,
personally.
right. What made you go to London for your master's instead of staying somewhere local?
Well, I did my BFA in Calgary,
Yeah.
the AU Arts, and for anyone who hasn't been to an art school, you don't get any real technical training nowadays. And so I knew if I was going to do a master's degree, I wanted to do it with painters. And so I applied in Europe, schools where the instructors were really, really good painters. And when UAL said yes, I figured I had to go. It was a pretty incredible opportunity. So we
Yeah.
were able to make it work. We brought a 1-month-old baby to London.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I went to London because of the quality of the instructors. They were real painters with very successful projects. They were working with the Tate Modern. They were doing things with the National Natural History Museum. They were showing in art fairs. They were the highest level of the academics that I could get.
I think that's because of their history. You know, Canada is like a baby country, right?
Oh yeah, London is a hub. It's where the museums are. It's where the culture is so old. It's taken from the entire world. So it reaps the benefits of that. Artists from all over the world gather there, and so it's such a bigger. It's funny, the world, Canadian art world is this tiny little thing in comparison. And it's so interesting to try to navigate it. But then when you go international, you see that, oh, it's just a baby. Canada is a baby. The art world is a baby. It's so small. You can meet everybody in your vicinity so quickly, where if you go to London, there's 300 galleries on a 10-block radius in Oxford Street. So it's pretty difficult to meet your people at that scale. But it isn't, you can walk to the Tate. I spent every Sunday at the Tate Modern. So it's such a privilege being able to, leave Canada.
But now you're back, and now you can share your wisdom with us. So
Yeah, absolutely. I still consider this home.
Yeah, for sure. Deb, do you have any other questions?
I do. I'm actually an emerging artist, and I'm here just because I was curious. And but for the sake of those watching afterwards, what you're going to be doing an aspiring course coming up, is that right?
I
Or
believe
not,
so,
sorry,
yes.
group. And so can you give us an idea of where you would begin with that?
It's a great question. I think for me, the nice thing about these groups is they're quite small. So I teach sessionally at the University of Calgary. I do drawing 101, 18-year-olds who want to be artists. And they don't have the skill, but they're in these very conceptual programs. And then I've taught at AU Arts Con Ed, where then you have mature students who have some skill, they've got some life experience. And so I've been around for a little bit. And so when I think about a Mastrius group and a mentor, it's kind of small. It's where are you? Are you struggling with your technique? Are you struggling with how to keep a body of work going? Because you need to build a body of work. It's the first thing that you have to do, and that I struggled with personally when I was younger painter, how to produce a solid 10, 15 paintings that really kind of grow and speak and build off of each other to then apply to things, talking. And then if some students are going that route, it's like your CV has to be built up. And how do you do that? This is all things that you think you need to go to art school for. You don't, but you also need to know what's going to get you shows and how to build that CV, how to build the body of work. But that's all. Can you paint? Can you make something that you're happy with to some extent? Can you build on something? Materials, palettes, paint. Yeah, everybody's a little bit different, but I love the idea that it's going to be smaller, a little bit more one-on-one. Everyone's going to bounce ideas off each other, but start there. What's your CV look like? And what's your paintings look like? And where do you want to take it? And lots of conversations along the way.
I love that you've been teaching drawing 101, because I've had many members. I've been a navigator with Mastrius for a lot of years now, and almost since the beginning. And I get a lot of people asking me what masters can teach drawing. And really, there's a few really good ones, but the more the merrier, because sometimes, you know, certain masters are not a great fit for a specific person or whatever. And so, yeah, that I'm thrilled to have somebody else to send to you, like to send them to.
The biggest struggle every North American artist has is drawing, because our schools don't teach it. If you go to Europe, you take a foundation year and you actually have to be very technical. They've got instructors there for just technique, like materials. Like if you're struggling with materials, there's an actual instructor. I want that job to deal with that. Yeah, we are very, drawing is the fundamental, because even if you grid or project or transfer, if you can't draw, you're going to run into all these problems. And then back to that idea of how do you kind of put your work and push it further. You've got to kind of elevate your work to be in whatever level you want to see yourself at. So if you want to be showing with a certain artist, you have to be able to produce work to that caliber. And if you can't fundamentally make it, you really don't have you have a long road ahead of you. I know, because I was on that road. I'm a Canadian painter who wanted to be a realist. It's been a long road.
Yeah, if you want to paint better, you got to draw better.
Absolutely.
Do you
Yeah,
ever
you gotta do it
find-
from life.
Yeah. You ever find that for myself, I paint forever. And then as soon as I want to do a value study or a drawing study or a composition study, I do run into problems because it feels like I've lost my ability to draw. Like, oh, how can that be? Because I'm producing these drawings or paintings behind me. Yet when it comes down to a sketchbook, you know, there's this disconnect suddenly. Do you ever get that as well? Like when you paint so much that you have a tough time drawing, or like, how do you balance that?
Ooh, I used to. I was so focused on being a painter that I skipped over drawing. I was like, I had a decent amount of drawing skill, I thought, at the time, and I jumped into painting. And my painting skills got better. Painting is just the application of paint and understanding your colors and your materials. But my paintings were starting to look good, but the drawing wasn't. So the realism would be slightly off. And so I had to go back and I had to draw. I could recognize that I either had to start projecting to get my drawing to be perfect, but if you're going to run into a whole bunch of problems if you do that. So
Yeah.
I just started drawing again. And now, because I teach drawing so frequently, I'm constantly doing demos. I'm drawing spheres. The first thing I get every student to do is draw me a sphere. If you can convincingly make it look three-dimensional, you move on to anything else you want. You would be shocked at how many skilled artists still struggle to draw a sphere three-dimensionally. That's drawing, that's value, that's angle, distance, shape, and value. And if you're not hearing that in your head as you're painting, you're probably going to be losing your angle, shapes, distance, and values. And that's why your painting is not going to turn out the way you want it to. But that's drawing, that's the thinking about what you're seeing and translating rather than what you're painting. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Do you keep a sketchbook? And do you do sketches before your paintings?
Digitally now. I have like old sketchbooks that I bring from just teaching. Like I do so many demos.
Right.
It's one thing that I love about being able to physically draw is I'm able to demonstrate how to sight size and how to measure and find anchor points and all these things that I've learned over the years and have practiced and I still use daily. But no, I don't sketchbook anymore, but I have a tablet, the one that I'm currently using now, and I doodle. Like I doodle colors, shapes. The abstraction for me is much more of an issue and a challenge than the realism at this point.
Right.
Like it still takes me forever to paint something to get it to look good enough. I still struggle with painting, but it's coming up with a strong composition, a really harmonious palette, and then placing it all so that there's some kind of interesting interaction. And so I spend a lot of time on my iPad just creating shapes and color relationships. And that's my sketchbook nowadays.
What made you switch from going manual to digital sketching?
When I started using the shapes, how quickly I can just rotate things and change colors and make these little thumbnails. And then it just became fun just to sit there and make these little abstracts. It's also so different for me. Like I've spent years of like, okay, I put an apple in front of me and I would draw it. And I would draw it until I thought it could look like an atelier drawing hundreds of times. And then I painted it. Once I was happy with the drawing, it took me 2 years of drawing and painting every day to get to the point where I actually wanted to show that work. And so, but that was almost 8 years ago now. So,
Do you save your sketches you do on your tablet?
sorry.
Do you save your sketches?
Some of them, yeah. Just little doodles. Wonder if I can share my screen somehow. Switch. I might be allowed to do that. Switch camera. I know Zoom on my computer. There's the options at the bottom. Share content.
I know if I want to attach my phone to Zoom, I have to log in as a separate person. Oh, you
Tell
got
me
it.
what you see.
Good job.
I see your screen. I'm just gonna spotlight you though, so that shows up.
Yeah, so here's an example,
Okay.
just. It's not fancy, it's simple,
Mm-hmm.
but
What
I'll show you,
program
I
are you
built it.
using?
Sorry, this is Adobe Fresco.
Okay.
And so I build a lot of my animals. So I find a piece that I actually painted. Your files. A lot of just ideas. This is kind of where I'm working out composition.
So the bowl of grapes, was that a photo that you had taken? And
Yeah,
just
so I
put it in
set
there?
up the still life. I'll just go back to it. Oh, can't touch it. Yeah, so I set up the still life and then I cut it out and then I start to compose it into the geometry, the minimalism, playing with different colors. It's also a way to see what they'll look like, changing the colors. That's closer to what I'm actually painting. But it gives you that visual aspect. When I compose my birds on a stick, I always composed with the rule of thirds, placing key points on those axes. Puffin I just painted. Just gives me this idea of, and then the geometry that I was talking about, just sitting and playing with shapes, seeing what some of the possibilities are. Finding flat shapes as well. I've yet to paint any of those, but it all just goes through different color versions, different shapes that I play with.
What got you interested in going toward the contemporary minimalism look combined with your realism birds and still life?
I'm just going to go back to Zoom and stop sharing. Stop share. Am I back?
You're back. Yeah.
Screens broadcasting. There we go. Okay, so when I moved to try and keep the very, very long answer short. When I moved to London, I didn't want to make a Nick Rooney. I built a little bit of a reputation here in Calgary. I've been in shows, I sold some paintings, and I wanted to push things to another level. And so packed up the bags, move across the world, drag a 1-month-old with you. I'm like, I better not make another Nick Rooney while I'm here. And so I spent a lot of time in the museums, a lot of time reading, going back to painting as a visual language. Why were painters painting? And when I started going through some of the writings of key kind of geometric minimalists, they were talking this language that I could really, really understand, that they were searching for something more. And in their case, something more was actually removing the subject. And so everything that I had learned in art school about formalism and what Clement Greenberg and all those big art history kind of academics taught you was all kind of wrong. And I love that because the painters were saying that they were trying to find a pure higher level of human kind of emotion and consciousness, and a lot of theosophy and things that completely went over my head. But they were trying to do something very specific. And I started to look at geometry and the kind of minimalistic shape as a specific language. They used it, they were studying it, they wrote about it. It's a language that I could then opposite end. The pure minimal shape with the highly rendered realism going for the same thing, where there was no kind of, it's very popular to take realism and abstract part of it, make it loose or impressionistic or leave parts of it unfinished. I was looking for a relationship where they were equal. The realism only functioned if the minimalism was there, and the minimalism then functioned as something completely different because of the realism. Really difficult to do, but I'm trying. And so then I started reading and writing and thinking, and it just sucked me into this world that there was a dialect, that these two opposite ways of speaking could actually say the same thing if you can combine them in the right way. And I have spent the last 3 years looking for those combinations. And then making it very commercial so that I can make some money, show it some galleries as well. Because I can't leave out that part.
What do you mean by that? By making it commercial?
Well, there's different levels of the art world, and there's also different types of painting. There's the very academic painting that gets written about, and then there's the painting that actually kind of sells. And if you want to be an academic, that's really great, but you don't tend to make work that's very commercial. It's not as accessible. And so you don't see it often in commercial galleries. And there's many different types of commercial galleries. So it depends on where you want to show your work. But if you make, in my case, if I put a bird on it and the bird has a specific relationship to what I'm trying to create, it's a much more commercial painting than if I was, for example, I was working with the collection of the British Museum, painting artifacts that were in kind of in question as to who owned it, preserve versus pillage. And those were very academic pieces that, well, I still have. Nobody wants to buy them. Not that I found yet. So I think you kind of have to weigh what type of painter you are and what type of career you want to have. And if you are more on the academic side, you probably won't show in a lot of galleries. And if you're more on the commercial side, making paintings that are not so academic, you're going to find a little bit more success probably selling your work. Does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. Is this what got you into the birds, that academic part of it? The last
No, it's funny,
conversation
the
we had,
birds,
you were called the bird man, right?
the birds have always been part of my work. Prior to, like, it's just something, once I stopped painting, like I started painting still life and people and everything, but I always enjoyed painting birds. And my first real body of work was birds landing on sculptures that I'd seen in Europe. So I went around different parts of Europe and I documented all these old sculptures, and I stick birds based off of their symbolism on the sculpture to create a narrative. And that was the first real body of work that kind of got me some attention. Was these bird sculpture pieces. And then when I kind of started more of the academic work, it shifted to more still life and objects that I found within a museum. And then when I moved back to Canada, I lost the museum, and I was living on the West Coast. I was in Nanoose Bay for a while, and I was in Victoria for a while. Herons, I just started watching birds again and realized that they were always perching and they're always so symbolic. So I started integrating them back into the work. And I did a fox in London because I had a family of foxes living out outside my kitchen window, outside of my flat was a family of foxes. And so foxes were showing up in my work in London, and herons when I was on the West Coast. And then it just, you sell a few, I decided to do a show of it, and the show did really well. So you do another show and next thing, but I paint all animals, but birds tend to be pretty dominant.
Yeah.
At this point.
So for aspiring artists, do you think in your group you might sort of teach how to submit to shows, what kind of shows that you'd possibly fit an aspiring person's work and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, absolutely. If someone's in the group and they say they want to be professional, is a strange because what does that really mean? Like, there's professional artists who are not making a living, there's professional artists who are making a really great living. If you want to take your work kind of to that next level, you need a CV, an artist resume. And that's what you apply for a lot of things with. And so an introduction of what that is to start, and yeah, how do you kind of start to build your CV in the right direction to start getting you more shows, to do an artist residency, to do all these things that young artists or aspiring artists may not even know about. So it's what's kind of happening locally around you, but then also what can you find that would fit your work? And that's where, yeah, someone with maybe a little bit more experience with doing that comes in. That could be pretty helpful.
We had a mini studio visit tour. Is there anything specific in your studio that you would say is a must for you? Like you cannot go without it?
Audiobooks. I'm sitting down here a lot. So audiobooks kind of put me in another headspace, that background noise. I'm very much a studio painter. Like I've got things set up so that I can like function properly. Because it's another thing that I tell anyone who will listen is if you're going to have a long career, you need to be able to physically do it. I know many older painters who have really tough time moving around the studio because they had horrible professional practices. So yeah, just having like, my palette is raised higher than most people's palettes probably. My screen sits next to my reference. It's on the same easel that I'm currently using. I have multiple easels where I stand for much of my work. I've got mall stick attachments so that I can try and keep my body straight. Yeah, if you're gonna be putting in 8-hour days making work 5, 6, 7 days a week, I'd say the professional practice, like the studio setup, can't live without it. The sit stand stool that after hour 4 and my knees start to hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the lame stuff that keeps you going. But yeah, my whole studio setup, minus the current lights, which are just, I haven't resolved yet, but lighting, and then yeah, proper posture. Make sure that everything, you're not bending over, you're not turning your head too much. It's all just things to give yourself the best chance at a long career.
Deb,
And if there's
do you
any
have
questions, sorry.
Gonna see if Deb had any other burning questions.
What kind of paint do you use? Oil?
Yes.
And do you have a preferred brand?
I used to be the biggest paint snob. I used to make my own.
Oh.
And so when I started studying oil painting, I made everything, my mediums, my paint. Like I went hardcore into that world. And that's something I recommend. You don't have to make your paint, but you got to go hardcore into that world. If you're going to be an oil painter, you have to be a painter. And so I got really spoiled for a really long time. Anything that's good professional. Right now I like Kama out of Montreal. It's a small batch paint mostly because the art store that I really like is the only one that in kind of Western Canada that carries it. And it's a good price because then you got to factor your price again. So well, Williamsburg is the best paint I've ever worked with that is not handmade. It's made in Williamsburg, New York. It's the closest thing you'll probably find to handmade paint. It's gritty, it's thick, it's got its own life, which is something we can talk. Color theory and pigment history is fascinating, but every paint brand has a different feel. And whenever I get the question about you have to try different brands, and ideally you try to make it yourself, even if it's kind of not the full method, because paint brands nowadays are manufactured. They're put through a machine. Like M-Gram is a great example. M-Gram is pretty good paint, but M-Gram feels nothing like what Rembrandt was using or what Turner worked with. And so it's so soft, it's over processed because they don't want you to use solvents. So they base their whole paint making recipe on the fact that it's got to be thinner, where a lot of oil paint doesn't even feel like that. And so different brands have different pros and cons. I just like good professional paint. Cama, Williamsburg, Old Holland, Gamblin. Gamblin is really good. Good paint. as
I've
well.
used both Amblin and Cama. Cama I find to be very pigment saturated, much thicker than Gamblin for sure. Both are just wonderful.
Yeah, Cama's great because it's Canadian made. It's the cheapest professional paint that I found here, especially here in Calgary. M-Gram is a little bit more expensive, but I'm not a big fan of that buttery consistency. It's too uniform. My old school painter in me wants a little bit of every pigment has a different feel.
Yeah.
And so as you start to feel and experiment with different pigments, you get a feel for that, but that shows in your work. It's part of that language. So anything that doesn't take away from that language, I think M-Gram can take away from it in some regards. But it's also great, like ultramarine blue, that's like super thin and transparent that you can glaze with very minimal medium. There's a perk to that.
Do you use single pigment colors? Only?
Yes, I have a, sorry.
Or a mix of them?
No, I have Van Dyke brown, cobalt teal, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, alizarin permanent, cad red light, yellow ochre, Indian yellow, and white. That's a palette I've developed over my career so far. I don't really change. So it's always the same. And they're all the teal. Sometimes I have, if I don't have cobalt teal, I'll have the premix, which is just phthalo, blue, green, and white. So that's the only, everything else is single pigment. Yeah.
I don't even know single pigment versus multiple pigment. Like, does that mean you're just mixing colors together, or you're just using it straight out of the tube?
No, so here's every paint tube has a list of what's in it. So this one is PB ultramarine blue. There's a little PB 29. If you can kind of see that there.
Well,
So
I'm gonna grab
that's
mine.
PB 29 is ultramarine blue, synthetic version. And so every single ultramarine blue that you buy will only have one blue in it, unless you buy something called like brilliant blue in a paint kit. That might have a mixture, but it probably won't even tell you. And so some colors, so for example, I'll grab that cobalt. Oh, sorry, this is turquoise light. So that's got PB 15, pigment green 7, pigment white 6. So that's got phthalo blue, some green plus white. So that's 3 pigments.
Oh, I see. Okay. My sap green has multiple. Now I know.
So it's not.
Okay.
And so it's a cheaper version. So this is like cheap turquoise, where cobalt turquoise is just one single pigment, no white.
Is there a benefit to doing a single pigment over multiple?
Think about if you cobalt turquoise is a great example. It's a single pigment without the addition of white, but it's so bright. White kills your color. Anytime you're adding white into your mixtures, you're graying it down. And so if you want pure saturated color, anything that's mixed with white is going to kill that saturation. So if you want to lighten your blue and you add cobalt turquoise, you're adding a lighter value without white. So you're going to get saturated blue that's not possible if there's the addition of white. Pure color, the simplest. So yes, white kills color, usually white is what they're, if you're going to have a multiple pigment, they're going to want to lighten it, or maybe they'll add yellow. But most multiple pigments are the addition of white to make a lighter value color, which will kill the color in your
Cool.
mixtures.
So we can learn all about that in your class. Your mentorship. Sorry, it's not a class.
Yeah, it's really, and that's where kind of my background, like I teach color theory. I've made my paints, so I've done pigment workshops kind of here and in London. I've taught color theory at all levels, drawing at all levels, painting at all levels. My technical foundation is kind of what I've built my entire career on. It's what people pay me to do. The universities, the Mastrius. I think the real reason people come to me is technique, but then you need ideas, then you need the academics. So I try to find that really good blend. And that's what hopefully will set me apart with Mastrius is you're not just going to get drawing, because drawing, anyone can learn to draw. That's the hard part about making art, is how do you take that drawing skill once you have it and then turn it into something. And that turning it into something has fascinated me, because that's what I'm constantly trying to do, push my work to another level. And drawing is always important. Every day you draw, but that taking that drawing to the next level, that's a whole rabbit hole that I have dedicated so much of my life to.
I have a whole list of questions, but I'm gonna wait for Deb.
No, go ahead.
I was wondering what historical artists were the most influential for you?
Rembrandt is the easy one, because 300 and something years and we still haven't figured out how he got his surfaces. I went to Amsterdam a few years ago to look at some Rembrandts in person. He was a magician with paint. There's theories on how he built his paintings up, but nobody has concrete answers. That's mind-blowing and incredible. So the understanding of a material at such a high level that we still don't know how you do it, biggest inspiration I can think of right now. And then the Dutch still life painters. The ability to make something look like you could reach out and touch it fascinates me. Anything created by the Dutch Baroque, kind of 17th, 18th century.
And then what about the abstract minimalist artists? Rothko always comes to mind when you talk about pure geometry or just pure color.
Rothko is fascinating because he was all about the spirituality. Rothko's writings are so deep and really moving in terms of what he was trying to accomplish, and he makes people cry. He did it. He's one of the very few people who were able to transcend paint. And that's a great example. I like personally, I'm really fascinated, like Ellsworth Kelly, early shapes, doing these crazy geometric shapes, because I posted a quote on my Instagram earlier, because I finally figured out a system for how to build these, and I can show you one if you want. These shaped canvases, because he was interested in breaking the boundaries of the rectangle, that there was so much more that could be said and felt. He was painting these really, in the quote, he's talking about, he's not interested in geometry, he's interested in his brooding emotions. He's trying to replicate what he's feeling, and you can't put this feeling in a box. It can't be a rectangle, it can't be a square, it had to be more. And so he started building these crazy shapes. So you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
It's that idea that, put that down. So yeah, I've got a few prototypes in the studio that I'm gonna start working with.
Yeah.
Irregular shapes. no side is the same. Automatically that throws off the balance. There's no stability. Now in Ellsworth Kelly and as well as like Mondrian and some of those early guys, now you can start speaking to something deeper. Cut away the security box. Love that. So I'm trying to integrate that in my work, which is hard, but
Yeah, very cool. So in terms of quote, that brings me to another question I had. Is there a quote that has shaped your practice, or not even your practice, but maybe even your art?
yeah, and I when I started talking about the mentorship, Chuck Close,
Yeah.
inspiration is for amateurs, professionals show up. I think that's
Nice.
roughly the loose quote. I
Yeah.
think it's like show up to work or something. And so Chuck Close is another phenomenal, if you're not familiar with Chuck Close, hyper realist oil paintings. I think, are you familiar with Chuck Close, Deb? Oh, did I freeze? Maybe.
No, I think we're good.
Oh,
Yep, we're good.
Yeah, Deb knows Chuck Close too, right?
perfect. What I love about Chuck Close is Chuck Close, well, that's love about. I love his mentality that you just show up. He fell down one day in the studio and he never got up again. Paralyzed from his neck down.
Oh my God.
I
Okay,
did not know.
so now I got a story for you. Oh, this is also why I paint solvent free, which is back to the materials. Like I don't work with any solvents in the studio.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons, but a big one is Chuck Close was spraying his oils, airbrushing it. So he was thinning it down and airbrushing it. So he was breathing in enormous amounts of solvent, and it's what they potentially think caused his nervous system to shut down. So he fell down one day in the studio and he never got back up. He was paralyzed from his neck down. And then after I think it was a couple years, he started to regain motion a little bit in his arm. And so he started strapping his paintbrush to his arm and he started moving his easel. The easel would move around and he was doing these portraits with these shapes, very loose style, because he was paralyzed. But he reinvented his entire career, and his later work is actually more popular than his early portraits were groundbreaking, but his later work was so much more well received by the public and his overcoming all this adversity. But he does it from a wheelchair, and his easel is what moves the canvas around, and his arm is pretty stationary, yet he's doing these 8 by 12 foot paintings. And so when you hear that inspiration is for amateurs, professionals show up, that's coming from someone who has to strap their paintbrush to his arm to paint. So I just, no other quote to me can sum up just you persevere, you push hard, and you make good work, and you kind of have to fight. Now, totally the biggest inspiration.
Awesome. Oh, what was I gonna say? I don't remember, but I do recall I had another mentor that I was navigating for. He was a Disney artist, and someone asked him something similar, and he said, it didn't matter how you felt that day, you have to go to work and you have to create these scenes, whether you like it or not. And that's still a part of what he brings home now to his personal studio. Is doesn't matter how you feel. You might feel like you just want to sit in bed all day and just look on Instagram, but no, you have to go and do it and show up, even if it's an hour. You just do it.
Yeah, I think Mastrius is nice because, like, when I was looking for an oil painter, so ACAD didn't have painters. Like, none of my professors were painters. They were they were artists, but they were more of the conceptual, did art school in the kind of, some of them were in the 60s doing art school, 60s, 70s. So their education was so different than what I wanted. And so when I left ACAD, I had to find painters. Like I had to find people who actually made paintings. And I was lucky enough to find some. And I do consider them to be mentors, but what I saw was how hard they worked. Like if you want to be in, like I'll speak to me, if I wanted to be that painter, like I wanted to be very similar to that painter, not in style, but in studio, beautiful studio, making work full time, shows in great galleries. Like I wanted that at the time. And he worked so hard every day, and it was his 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 in the studio. And there wasn't any real excuse because it was work. And I think back to that Chuck Close, inspiration is for amateurs. If you don't consider it work, you're probably not working hard enough compared to the painter that you admire. You're not going to find a painter that you admire that is very successful and they're not on Instagram on the couch. They're maybe on Instagram in the studio nowadays, but they're making work and they're making lots of it because they have to. They have to produce a body of work followed by a body of work followed by a body of work. That's an enormous commitment.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the biggest misconception about the artist is that I always talk about students, it's like it flows. It doesn't always flow and it doesn't always feel good and it doesn't always work. It actually doesn't work most of the time if you're working because you're trying things, you're pushing things, you're failing, you're finding a little bit of success, but you're finding a lot of failure and you're trying to find this balance, but you're working. And by working, you're constantly trying new things. Like if you're not working, you're not generating new ideas. You're not like I do spend a lot of time thinking and looking, and then I spend a lot of time trying to get away from the studio. But at the back of my head, I'm always working. I'm always, what's the next image? How could I take this? And then I have to go to the studio or the iPad and I have to see it. It's all work.
That's awesome. On that note, I am really looking forward to working with you, and we will get this small group going hopefully by next Friday, July 14th, at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. That's when we're starting. So yeah, it's going to be on YouTube. Hopefully other navigators can help fill the group.
Yeah, and
awesome.
I'll work toward it as well. And then I'm excited to, it's a different format than any of my other kind of teaching jobs. Because that's kind of what I think about as it's all a job right now, but teaching is kind of, what I do in a lot of ways. So I'm excited for this version and the kind of, studio. It's not this academic setting, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah. So welcome to Mastrius. I'm so excited to have this group start. So hooray. Thanks for coming, Deb.
Thank you.
No problem. I'll spread the word too.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So for now, hopefully we'll see you next Friday and have a great weekend. Happy
Awesome.
creating.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.